Well, we've heard that the Seahawks are looking to replace Pete Carroll potentially with Dan Quinn. We've also heard from Ian Rappaport that Dan Quinn's very interested.
As far as the Dan Quinn thing, when he removed himself from consideration last year, I don't want to get into what we just talked about. When he physically removed himself from being a coach candidate last year, my thought was always he's waiting for Seattle. He's going to have options this year. He is a really strong candidate in a year where I think there's some good coaches out there, but maybe the resumes aren't what they've always been. Like, there'll be some teams taking a little bit of a risk. Dan Quinn is not a risk. He's been to the Super Bowl. He's a really good coach. I think Seattle, I think there's some mutual interest, and that would make sense. That's always seemed like the logical thing. And culture is so important there. You wouldn't have to teach anything.
Again, Dan Quinn, safe bet for a team looking to win, to improve its defense. His Cowboys defense has been 5th overall in the league. I think 4th, 5th, and 7th or something. Top 10 defense in the last 3 years. That's what you need to know. The Seahawks have not been. And yet, Bump, I know you've seen the text.
But Stacey.
I know you've seen the tweets.
But Stacey.
I know you've heard people be worried following that Cowboys loss. And it was just a defensive and full team collapse by Dallas.
Yeah, it was bad. I think if Dallas wins that game last night, I don't think we get all the texts that we get right now.
No.
Because we've been talking about Dan Quinn ever since the news dropped that Pete Carroll's out, right? You automatically try to find, okay, who's been here? Who is Jody going to connect with? And the first name that popped up was Dan Quinn. Now, there were some people on the text lines who didn't agree with it, some people on Twitter who didn't agree with it, but they are louder now because of what you saw last night. And honestly, what you saw last night was embarrassing. I mean, I'm watching the game plan of the Dallas Cowboys, and they're coming out nickel and dime when the Green Bay Packers is running all over them. It's like, all right, man, you're going to ask this 205-pounder dude to tackle this running back, to take on these blocks or whatnot. It just seemed like they were not able to adjust. Now, every DC goes in with a game plan, and Dan Quinn probably thought this was going to work out for us, right? We're going to be able to get pressure on Jordan Love with Micah Parsons. What the Green Bay Packers did is they ran at Parsons. That's what you do when you have a guy that's dominant like Parsons. You don't run away from him. You don't allow him to track you down on the backside to get one-on-ones. You run at him so he gets double-teamed. And it just seemed like they weren't able to make the adjustments. You mentioned they were 5th on defense. You know the Hawks were on defense last year? 30th. Okay, they were 16th against the run. I know 16th ain't great. You know the Hawks were last year? 30th. Okay, they were 13th in sacks. The Hawks were 12th. So, and we make these comparisons, but also we got to remember, too, that Dallas Cowboys got a lot of talent over there.
Yeah.
I mean, you got Michael Parsons over there. You got Bland, who had himself a career year. I believe they had, something like 7 Pro Bowlers and 9 All-Pro dudes over there.
Last year, Diggs.
Yeah, it was crazy, right? So the talent is different, but I firmly believe that if the Cowboys win that game, then people in the public are looking at Dan Quinn differently. The question is, how does Jody view him? Does Jody and John view him the same way? Remember what Pete Carroll said? He goes, I'm talking to people who aren't football people, right? So now the football person is going to have to make a football hire, and let's see what she does with it.
From the 907, his Cowboys defense plays the Giants and Commanders twice a year. I mean, the Seahawks play bad teams too, and Dallas actually throttles the bad teams that it plays. Like, that's the difference between – there are a lot of differences between Dallas and Seattle, but one of them is that while they have not lived up, Dallas, to expectations once they get to the postseason, and while they have struggled against teams that are really good and do have winning records, they have decimated teams with losing records.
Right.
And so they get the job done when they're supposed to. Seattle, I don't know that you can say the same. Seattle has played down to competition. They have barely squeaked by when it comes to weaker competition. And sometimes it leaves you wondering whether the competition is that much weaker. I mean, Seattle statistically, you're right, Bump, you pointed out those numbers defensively, is awful. Like, they are awful. They do one thing fine, which is get sacks. They don't apply consistent pressure, though. And a lot of those sacks, 11 of them, came in one game against the Giants. So, again, do I think that it is probably an overreaction to look at a really bad defensive performance by Dallas and say Dan Quinn isn't the guy? Given what Dallas has been able to do for 3 seasons, yeah. And also, I think that Dallas's postseason collapse and their issues there are a team Dak McCarthy issue and not just on their defensive coordinator.
No, it's not. But when you give up 48 of them things, I'm sorry, 48 of them things, and but 14 came from the offenses. Pick six, right? I look at this and I just ask questions, right? Because how was this team able to perform at the level that they did? Now, granted, I saw a stat, I think Dan Orlovsky put it out there, that McCarthy and Dak Prescott together are 13-15 against teams at the end of the season with a winning record. So that it's almost like they fool you into believing that there's something that they're not. You're undefeated at home. The part that hurts the most is that the youngest team in the NFL beat you yesterday. The youngest team in the NFL. You got Romeo Doubs looking like he is an all-pro type dude. You got Jordan Love having his breakout game. If Jordan Love had the game Dak Prescott had, because he's so young, we'd be like, oh, it's okay, right? But no, Love had the game that you want Dak to have. So now I start looking at what's the culture like over there, and what is Jerry Jones's role? Like, is Jerry Jones walking through that locker room before the game, putting all this pressure on these guys? Is he showing up at every meeting? Now, we know he's at some coaches' meetings, but, like, what does his presence do to this football team? Because you look at all the talent they got over there. There's no reason why this game should have went down like that. So it comes down to coaching, because you got the talent over there, and you haven't been able to maximize that and maximize Dak Prescott. I think it changes the way people look at Dak too. Like I think that he's before this he's an MVP candidate, but to remain in those conversations, to be looked at that every single year, you got to win some playoff games, and he just ain't been able to do that. I think it's important for Lamar to win some games this playoffs too, because he's got one to win himself.
Yep. I am very interested in some other candidates, whether it's Ben Johnson, whether it's Mike McDonald, who's defensive coordinator for the Ravens. Like, if you're like, hey, I'm looking for the defensive McVay dude, that's him. Like, really smart guy just on the defensive side of things. He'd be the youngest coach in the NFL at 36 years old. Like, I would be interested to see the Seahawks kick the tires and see if they can make something work with something they've never tried. Like, Dan Quinn has overseen amazing defenses, and I think would be and can be a great head coach. I'm not mad at that, but I am interested in some other candidates too. I will say this. For the people that saw that game and thought, I don't want Dan Quinn, never mind. Well, a lot of other teams do. According to Albert Breer, Cowboys defensive coordinator Dan Quinn will interview for the Panthers and Titans jobs this week. Then also, in addition to that, so he'll interview for those jobs Wednesday. On Thursday, he's talking with the Commanders, and on Friday with the Chargers. 4 teams this week are interviewing Dan Quinn for a head coaching job.
Where the Hawks at?
I don't see him there.
Come on now. So you might be getting your wish. And just like the public has been influenced by last night, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have been influenced, because that was ridiculous. Maybe ownership here has been influenced too, and be like, actually, you know what? If he would have came out and that defense looked great, then maybe he's a bit more attractive. But because he's been here already, and because they just got beat down last night, Seattle doesn't want to feel like they're just running it back and saying, okay, we're going to get a replica of what Pete Carroll is. Now, granted, he runs a 4-3 over there. Things are a bit different, 3-4 over here. They do some different things, but it just feels all too familiar. And because of that loss last night, people ain't messing with him.